The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Page 106. Okay, there is one thing that I forgot to do. I'll do it right now. Before I start, I'd like to make this video private just to avoid interruptions, and it's really important. It's really important that I'm able to keep the flow of this presentation and that I'm not stopped. The flow of a presentation has a lot to do with how a lecturer or a teacher, a public speaker, is able to present his or her point of view, present the topic of discussion, and not be stopped or interrupted, because it really creates, I want to create an archive that's comprehensible. So the way just setting everything for private will prevent interruptions. The Picture of Dorian Gray, page 106. At this point, Dorian Gray wants the painting to be out of his sight, out of his mind. He doesn't want to look at the painting and be reminded of what it represents. He doesn't want to be reminded of death. And yesterday, when I created another archive, I talked about how the painting represents, among other things, death. Symbolically, there was that cloth that was not just a piece of cloth. It was not just something to cover the painting with. There is symbolism behind it because it was found in a convent somewhere, and it used to be something that covered the dead. And now he's using that to cover the painting. So it's not by chance. It really is the presence of symbolism in that passage. So the painting represents death because the painting will deteriorate. The painting will get wrinkles in its face, gray hairs. The painting will go through that process until death. And Dorian Gray will remain young forever. And he wants to live this forever without being reminded of what could have been. By the same token, he doesn't understand the process. That's when realismo fantástico, which in Brazilian and Portuguese literature is described as the type of literature where there are supernatural events taking place, but they are accepted as reality. They're incorporated into reality, and they're accepted in a way that nobody has an explanation, a plausible explanation for it. Plausible means reasonable, understandable, comprehensible. Plausible and possible are two different things. Plausible, something that could be explained through logic. Possible, something that could happen. So there is, a lot of people, perhaps for a lack of vocabulary, they have a tendency to misconstrue certain things. And that's not a problem. That's where literature plays a tremendous role in helping acquire vocabulary, in helping people become better writers. So it's all part of the process, learning new words, learning new sentence patterns, if you will, using correct word order, using the correct placement of prepositions. All of that in grammar. Grammar is everything that the language, when it's spoken properly, it's everything in the language. But grammar has sentence patterns, adjectives, adverbs, verbs, prepositions, conjunctions. There is a myriad of different aspects of it. And I will take the time to use those elements of grammar in my presentations, in my lectures. He had not entered the place for more than 4 years. Not indeed, since he had used it first as a playroom when he was a child, and then as a study when he grew somewhat older. It was a large, well-proportioned room, which had been specially built by the last Lord Kelso for the use of the little grandson, whom for his strange likeness to his mother, and also for other reasons, he had always hated and desired to keep at a distance. It appeared to Dorian to have been little change. There was the huge Italian cassone, with its fantastically painted panels and its tarnished gilt mouldings, in which he had so often hidden himself as a boy. There, the setting wood bookcase filled with his dog-eared schoolbooks. On the wall behind it was hanging the same ragged Flemish tapestry, or tapestry, if you will, where a faded king and queen were playing chess in a garden, while a company of hawkers rode by, carrying hooded birds on their gauntleted wrists. How well he remembered it all! Every moment of his lonely childhood came back to him as he looked around. He recalled the stainless purity of his boyish life, and it seemed horrible to him that it was here the fatal portrait was to be hidden away. How little he had thought, in those dead days, of all that was in store for him! For there was no other place in the house, no secure form prying eyes as this. He had the key, and no one else could enter it. Beneath its purple pall, the face painted on the canvas could grow bestial, sodden, and unclean. What did it matter? No one could see it. He himself would not see it. Why should he watch the hideous corruption of his soul? The hideous corruption of his soul. What happens here with aestheticism, which is aesthetic, all that's physical appearance, all that's apparent, all that's on the outside. He was very much obsessed with his physical appearance. So what happens is that represents his soul. It represents his soul because he could not live with himself if he were to grow old, if he were to lose his aestheticism, if he were to lose his beauty, his youth. So he doesn't want to watch the corruption of his soul. It is symbolic, but still, for Dorian Gray, his soul is only intact if he is beautiful, if he is young, if he gains the wrinkles of time, and if he gains all the gray hairs or maybe loss of hair, if he changes physically, he can no longer live with himself. His soul is being corrupted as his body deteriorates, but his body will not deteriorate. The painting will. So he doesn't want to watch it. Why should he watch the hideous corruption of his soul? He kept his youth, that was enough. And besides, might not his nature grow finer? After all, there was no reason that the future should be so full of shame. Some love might come across his life and purify him, and shield him from those sins that seemed to be already stirring in spirit and in flesh. Those curious unpictured sins, whose very mystery lent them their subtlety and their charm. Perhaps some day the cruel look would have passed away from the scarlet, sensitive mouth, and he might show to the world Basil Hallward's masterpiece. No, that was impossible. Hour by hour, and week by week, the thing upon the canvas was growing old. He might escape the hideousness of sin, but the hideousness of age was in store for it. The cheeks would become hollow or flaccid. Yellow crow's feet would creep round the fading eyes and make them horrible. The hair would lose its brightness. The hair would lose its brightness. The mouth would gape or droop, would be foolish or gross, as the mouths of old men are. There would be the wrinkled throat, the cold blue-veined hands, the twisted body that he remembered in the grandfather who had been so stern to him in his boyhood. The picture had to be concealed. There was no help for it. "Bring it in, Mr. Hubbard, please," he said wearily, turning round. "I'm sorry I kept you so long. I was thinking of something else." "Always glad to have a rest, Mr. Gray," answered the frame maker, who was still gasping for breath. "Where shall we put it, sir?" "Oh, anywhere. Here, this will do. I don't want to have it hung up. Just lean it against the wall, thanks." "Might one look at the work of art, sir?" Dorian started. "It would not interest you, Mr. Hubbard," he said, keeping his eye on the man. He felt ready to leap upon him and fling him to the ground if he dared to lift the gorgeous hanging that concealed the secret of his life. "I shan't trouble you any more now. I am much obliged for your kindness in coming around." "Not at all, not at all, Mr. Gray. Ever ready to do anything for you." And Mr. Hubbard tramped downstairs, followed by the assistant, who glanced back at Dorian with a look of shy wonder in his rough, uncomely face. He had never seen anyone so marvelous. When the sound of their footsteps had died away, Dorian locked the door and put the key in his pocket. He felt safe now. No one would ever look upon the horrible thing. No one but his would ever see his shame. On reaching the library, he found that it was just after 5 o'clock, and that the tea had been already brought up. On a little table of dark, perfumed wood, thickly encrusted, again, adverbs. Thickly, that's an adverb that originates from the noun thick. As a matter of fact, let me write this down. As a matter of fact, let me write this down. Thickness is the noun, not thick. Thick is the adjective. Thick, thick, thickness, thickly. Thickness, thickness, thickness. I'm putting my tongue there because it's very important for people to understand it's not an F and it's not an S. Thickness is the noun. Thick is the adjective. I could be doing this on webcam max, but it lags a lot when I'm making a video, so I'm writing it down on paper instead. So thickness, the noun, thick, the adjective, and thickly, thickly Thickly is the adverb. Now, just knowing the names of, the categories in which these words belong, that doesn't help much, does it? You need to know how to use them and what the difference is. If you say, for instance, that woman has very thick legs, you are telling me what her legs look like. It is an adjective that tells me what her legs are like. They are thick. If you say the thickness of her legs is something that interests me, then you're telling me about a noun, the thickness, that quality of her legs, the thickness of them. And the usage of it, you don't say she has thickness legs, but you do say she has thick legs. If you want to talk about how thick her legs are, then you will talk about the thickness of her legs. Then, if you want to talk about the manner in which, because we got this adverb straight from a passage here in the book, thickly encrusted. So they're not just encrusted, they're thickly encrusted. So you can imagine a thick layer because the manner in which that was encrusted was thickly. So you have thickness, the noun, thick, the adjective, and thickly, the adverb. I don't believe that this is just for foreign students. I believe that native speakers of the English language could really benefit from learning this and becoming better writers and understanding their own language better. A present from Lady Radley, his guardian's wife, a pretty professional invalid who had spent the preceding winter in Cairo, was lying a note from Lord Harry, and beside it was a book bound in yellow paper. The cover slightly torn, another adverb, slightly. You have slight, which is the adjective, and slightly, which is the adverb, the manner in which something happens or the manner in which something, you modify or modify, if you will, a word using an adverb. So the cover was torn. Was it completely torn? No, it was slightly torn. So this adds more information to what you're trying to say, and an adverb will modify. It will give you the manner in which something is or in which something happens. And the edges soiled. A copy of the third edition of the St. James Gazette had been placed on a tea tray. It was evident that Victor had returned. He wondered if he had met the men in the hall as they were leaving the house, and had wormed out of them what they had been doing. He would be sure to miss the picture. Had no doubt missed it already. He missed it already. While he had been laying the tea things, the screen had not been set back, and a blank space was visible on the wall. Perhaps some night he might find him creeping upstairs and trying to force the door of the room. It was a horrible thing to have a spy in one's house. He had heard of rich men who had been blackmailed all their lives by some servant who had read a letter, or overheard a conversation, or picked up a card with an address, or found beneath a pillow a withered flower or a shred of crumpled lace. This passage reminds me of a book named O Primo Basílio, from Portuguese literature. By Portuguese, I mean from Portugal. Primo Basílio is a story of a woman. She's a housewife. She has everything going for her. Well, at the time, being a housewife, it was a fantastic thing for a woman to be. She had a good husband who provided for her, and this husband goes on a business trip, and then her cousin Basílio shows up, a cousin that she had had a fling with when she was younger. And the cousin comes by every day to see how she is. And Luisa, one of the main characters of this book by Essa de Queiroz, Luisa gets very involved with cousin Basílio. He seduces her, and all of a sudden, when she least expects, she's in love with him. She has a torrid affair with him, and all is well. The husband doesn't know about it. He comes back. She's fine with the husband. She has a housekeeper who finds a letter. This is the plot of O Primo Basílio by Essa de Queiroz, a masterpiece of Portuguese literature. Cousin Basílio, you would be translated as. The housekeeper finds a letter in the trash, and the letter is a love letter between the cousin and Luisa. So that creates a conflict of incredible proportions because Luisa is now starting to become blackmailed by this housekeeper, and her life becomes a living hell. But anyway, I just thought of it as that's why Dorian Gray is being careful. He doesn't want the servants to know about the painting. And then Oscar Wilde describes very well that he had heard of rich men who had been blackmailed all their lives by some servant who had read a letter or overheard a conversation or picked up a card with an address or found beneath a pillow a withered flower or a shred of crumpled lace. So servants can be very dangerous. Inquest of an actress. An inquest was held this morning at the Bell Tavern, Hoxton Road, by Mr. Danby, the district coroner, on the body of Sybil Vane, a young actress recently engaged at the Royal Theatre, Holborn. A verdict of death by misadventure was returned. Considerable sympathy was expressed for the mother of the deceased, who was greatly affected. Another adverb, greatly. She was not affected, just affected. She was greatly affected. The manner in which she was affected, greatly. And that comes from the adjective great. You say, this is a great play. So you were describing the play. It's an adjective to the word play. Now here, greatly affected. In what manner was she affected? Greatly. She was greatly affected during the giving of her own evidence and that of Dr. Barrow, who had made the post-mortem examination of the deceased. He was reading this in the paper. He frowned and, tearing the paper in two, went across the room and flung the pieces away. How ugly it all was. So he gets rid of it immediately. This is Dorian Gray. He doesn't want any ugliness in his life whatsoever. Whenever there is any hint of something negative or ugly, he wants to put it away. He wants to put the painting away because the painting symbolizes to him death. And the symbolism presented to us readers in the novel is in the form of what does he choose to cover the painting with? Something that was used to cover the dead. because that's what the painting represents to him, death. And to him, death is ugly. Getting old is ugly. And now the death of Sybil Vane, that's ugly. He doesn't want to face it. He doesn't want to think about it. He reads a notice in a paper, the obituary or the inquest, or he doesn't want to deal with it. So he crumples the paper and throws it away. Some people deal with negativity in different ways. Some people just put it out of mind, out of sight, out of mind. They don't want to look at it. They don't want to deal with it. Other people want to face it, face the negativity. They want to discuss it to death, or they want to sit and express their feelings of anger or of sadness. In a case here with Dorian, he doesn't want to express that. He wants to put it out of his sight, out of his mind.